Superhero games have a long and storied history. Some are good, some are bad. We've been going all the way from the NES up until now with the recent release of Spider-Man 2. And while, like I said, some have been bad, like most licensed to movie video games, and others have been great, like the Arkham series or Insomniac Spider-Man games, there are some that come out and kind of get forgotten because they're a little bit lower. And some heroes are also not nearly as well known as others. I think more people know about Batman and Spider-Man than they do about Hellboy. Hellboy Web of Wyrd has been out for a while now. I've been trudging my way through it here to give you guys a full in-depth review, and I finally feel like I'm ready to do it. So hey everyone, it's Finn with Our Eyes on Indie, and it's time for a review of Hellboy Web of Wyrd. If you don't know who Hellboy is or what this game is, let me break it down for you really quick. So, Hellboy is a hero from Dark Horse Comics. He's half human, half demon creature. He's from hell. There were some movies about him with Ron Perlman back in the day, and then the other one with David Harbour. That was definitely not nearly as good. But Hellboy is one of those characters that I'm a little back and forth on. Being a Christian myself, this idea of something coming from hell and doing any good, obviously, is just not something that would happen. But I enjoy the theming and the ideas in Hellboy of dealing with the occult stuff. I find it super interesting. And so, Hellboy Web of Wyrd caught my attention, especially because he's being voiced by the late, great Lance Reddick. And so, getting to see one last performance from Lance Reddick sounded pretty great to me. Now, this is from Upstream Arcade, the people that brought us West of the Dead, and published by Good Shepherd Entertainment. And while Upstream Arcade used Ron Perlman in the last one, and he fought undead and occult creatures in the West, now we don't actually see him coming back like he did in Hellboy 1 and 2. Instead, we got Lance Reddick. And so the question is this game good? Well, let's get into it. So let's go ahead and start the visuals because they're immediately going to catch you. This was done in cooperation with Mike Mignola, the person who obviously created and illustrated Hellboy, and I love his art style, okay? The over-exaggerated shadows with the colors just look so good. It's one of my favorite things. It's something where if you have that Witcher graphic novel that came out a few years ago, where the cover is that same style, I just like to have it for the cover, in all honesty. I think it's wonderful, and I would love any kind of poster of any kind of character to be done in this style. It's just so cool to me. I love it, and this game captures it phenomenally. Everything is bathed in these over-exaggerated shadows, and Hellboy and characters do these kind of still frames and cutscenes where they're very comic book. So you do have to get used to that. It's a very stylized thing, and if you're not a big fan of that, you're not going to enjoy it, especially in those cutscenes where it's just comic book panels, essentially, and they're not actually moving. You also have to get used to that. But it's also things like, when you're walking, Hellboy moves at a lower frame rate, so he looks more comic book. But as soon as you start sprinting and getting into combat, he bumps back up to that 60 FPS so that things run smoothly. And I really enjoy that, because it keeps me in that comic book mindset, while also making sure that everything's nice and smooth and clear cut when I get into the action. And so I'm not worried about, oh shoot, I feel like I'm stuttering when I'm trying to land a hit on an enemy. So it's fantastic. It is just so good. And the music is also very well done in this game. Every time I get into combat or just walking around, the music would kick in from being silent. I enjoyed it, and it really set the mood for me. The art and the music, everything just set the atmosphere so well. The sound design's also fairly good. It felt a little cut and dry to me in some places, and while I was able to tell where things were coming from a lot of the time, some of that just came from being able to see it more so than audio because of how the camera works in this game. But it's still good. I also enjoyed the camera effect where when you lock onto an enemy, the sides of your screen kind of close in and get you in more of a comic-y style. It's really great. It looks awesome. Again, something that might not be for everybody with that, but for me, it worked incredibly well. I also want to give a huge shout out to all the voice casts in this game. Everyone does incredibly well. And obviously, I'm going to give another shout out to Lance Reddick. May he rest in peace. But man, his performance as Hellboy in this, every single time I listen to it, as I'm playing through, I go, man, this just sounds so good, and he performs it so well. But everyone in the voice cast does an incredible job. Huge shout out to everybody that worked on that department. So let's get into the story and let's talk about the game here. Alright, here's the deal. In Hellboy Web of Wyrd, not Web of Wyrd, Web of Wyrd, as the characters call it, you are tasked with going to this place called the Butterfly House, where a former agent of your team has gone missing. You show up, you find them, and then you get into the actual game here, finding out that, okay, you go in and you have to destroy these bosses in the Wyrd that are making it so there's seismic activity or psychic activity that's spiking throughout the globe. Now, defeating these bosses stops that activity, but then things go a bit further as you're trying to find the constructor slash owner of this house called the Butterfly House where you're stationed at. This person seems to be in the Wyrd still and is causing these psychic disturbances. Now, as you're going forward, this game is a roguelike, alright? But here's the thing, it feels like a very weird roguelike. Because when you're going through, you're going from room to room down these kind of long and arduous hallways that sometimes have traps in them, but the traps are always easy to avoid. And you're going from one room to the next, doing some combat. But after a combat room, unlike things like Hades, you're not actually getting a reward for it. The only time you're getting rewards in this are from specific rooms that are going to grant you rewards. Or if you go to the shop, and I actually have a weird problem with the shop, and the fact is, shops are too expensive. Before you can even buy from a shop, you have to unlock the shop, which costs you 200 threads, which is the currency in the Wyrd. Then every single blessing you can buy from that shop costs 300. Doesn't matter what it is, it's always 300. And the other thing is, too, you can only have up to 6 blessings total. So, how does that work, you may ask? Well, there are 3 that just straight up buff your character, and then there are 3 that go to 3 pieces of equipment. And when you have each one of those, they can't be equipped to another thing or swap to their alternate version. For example, all the personal ones do everything from giving you extra bullets in your mag to making it so that your talisman will cool down faster, or giving you extra health, extra toughness, but you can only have one of those at a time. If you find that blessing a second time, you can upgrade it, or you can swap it to the other one, but it seems kind of weird to me to even have this swap mechanic in a lot of ways because of the fact that if you're swapping, you're just downgrading back to level 1. It's a bit weird, it's kind of bizarre, and I didn't really ever like it. It just felt like I wasn't truly progressing anywhere throughout a run. I felt like I was kind of staying stagnant the whole time. Especially when it comes to the different blessings you can put on your weapons. Now, with these, alright, there are just clear-cut better ones than others, especially if you put them on the right ones. There's one that you get from the second boss. After you kill the second boss, this one can spawn. And what it does is it makes it that when you're hitting enemies with that particular weapon or charm, they have a chance to become feared and essentially just sit there stunned. Now, every time I saw this, I would just put it on my fist, which is your main weapon in this game. So I would just wail on enemies, and then they had a higher chance of getting stunned due to the fact I was hitting them more with that particular thing, and then it made it so much easier. So it's just a bummer to me that when this game is coming to you as a roguelike, you're not really getting these upgrades throughout a run that make things like Hades and Ember Knights so much fun, or even Endless Dungeon that we just talked about, where you're getting a bit stronger throughout the run and you're strategizing, you're getting more towers, making the towers better, getting a couple upgrades here and there for your character. It's a bit of a bummer. And the other thing too is when you're going into a run, there aren't that many things to bring into a run. Because here's the thing. In Hellboy Web of Wyrd, you have an overall upgrade system that gives you either more health, more toughness, which we'll get into that in a moment, or just gives you some extra damage on a couple of your more innate skills as Hellboy. The other thing is you can pick one of 3 guns to bring in. You get a revolver, a shotgun, and a grenade launcher. These boil down to one dealing more stun damage, one dealing more damage, and another having AoE. I found myself just bringing the revolver. It worked the best for me. And then when talismans, you have one that knocks enemies back, you have one that gives you a shield for the next hit, and then you have one that deals some damage. These I found a little more useful across the board and was able to find some interesting things that I could do with a couple of them. For example, the knockback one, if you knock them back into a wall, it deals a good chunk of damage to enemies if you can line it up right. So that made it not feel entirely useless like I initially thought it was going to be. But when you get into a run itself, here's the thing. Again, I don't think this game is a good roguelike by any shot. I don't think it fits that category. It just never felt that way, especially because the first part of the game. Let's talk about this really quick. The first part of the game, a roguelike, is typically hard and is going to take some time. I got through the first, well, it's Act 2 technically, but it feels like it's Act 1 of this game in the minimum amount of runs possible. I did it in 4 runs. That means I was able to get through and beat the boss of each area on the first try. And that feels a little bit bad. Now, granted, maybe I just got a hang of the system really quick. I had this same thing with Returnal when I played that, where I was able to beat Returnal very quickly just because of how I was able to get through, especially if you know the twist in that game. I was able to do the thing after that twist in 1 run. So with that said, it's one of those where maybe I just got really good at it, but it didn't feel that way to me. So with that said, even after you do that and you get through the first act and the minimum runs, which I thought would be the end of the game at first, it thankfully was not, or that would have been about 2 hours only, and I would have been done with the game. There is a bit more afterwards. I'm not going to spoil exactly what it is, but I will say it just feels like more of the same. It didn't feel entirely like, oh, here's something new. It felt like, okay, do the same thing again, but a little bit longer and a little bit more arduous. Now, granted, when we got to this point and the new things got introduced, I did actually finally die in a run, but I still only died once in my time of this game. That's how easy it was for me. Again, your mileage may vary. I just jived with the systems very well. Speaking of the systems, let's talk about the gameplay here itself. I talked about walking through hallways and how I don't feel it's a good roguelike. But how is it as a brawler? Because that's what this game is marketed as. It's a roguelike brawler. And I gotta say, I love the brawling in this game. I really do. This is where the game shines, and I think that's fantastic. When you go into a room, you're going to have to deal with typically no more than 5 enemies total, right? Most of the time, I found it being 1 or 2, and then in certain rooms, it would be a bit more. But there are also these little enemies around called mooks, and mooks are literally just there as toughness pinatas, all right? Because here's the thing. If you know anything about Hellboy, Hellboy's a brawler. Brawlers are typically going to take hits more than they dodge hits. And so you have a health bar, but you also have a toughness bar. So your toughness bar needs to be refreshed, because otherwise your health takes damage and it's hard to heal your health in this game. So with that in mind, mooks, whenever you kill them or whenever you kill all enemies in a room, and mooks will then explode and they will give you toughness back. So, it's this whole balance of taking damage, because you also have a retribution meter. When that fills up from taking damage, which blocking also still makes you take damage, even a perfect block, you'll still take a bit of damage. It'll just deal a lot extra stun damage back at your opponent. You're building up this retribution meter, which is a giant execution attack that doesn't always kill, but certainly always looks cool, I gotta say. It's fantastic. I like it. It's a great system. I think it's one of my favorite because it always encouraged me to block instead of dodge. Be like, okay, do I have enough toughness? Do I need to go and kill a mook? Because at first, I thought the mooks were just kind of weird. They never felt annoying like they were attacking me, because the enemies have to kind of call them to swarm you. But even then, if you have like the knockback talisman, you just push them all back and then they sit and wait to be commanded again. But I still enjoyed it. I like the combat system because it goes into a bit of a combo thing. You're doing light attacks and you have heavy attacks, and then you can weave in your gun or your talisman in between. And I was able to find a good rhythm later on when I had every single equipment item unlocked, which doesn't take very long. You get it pretty quickly. So I was using a combination of the damage talisman and the revolver with my basic attacks. I would go in, I would do a few light attacks, do a heavy, go into a gun attack, and then follow it up with the damage talisman. And that was able to get me a lot of damage without letting my opponent any time to react. And that felt really good. The other thing too is you have a stun bar that enemies are going to have. You're going to build that up with basic attacks. If you're using the revolver, it builds it up even more. And when you get that full, enemies become stunned. When an enemy is stunned, you can position around them and then charge up for a really heavy attack that does this really cool animation where you wind up, you punch them, you send them flying back, it does this nice big flash of red, and that never, I mean never ever ever did not feel satisfying. Every single time I did it, I always felt so satisfied at launching that giant enemy back across the room into a pillar, into a couple of mooks, so I could get some toughness back, or into another enemy even, if I decided to position right. But just knocking them back, hitting them into a wall or anything, it always feels so good. It really does. And again, the combat in Hellboy Web of Wyrd just feels so good every single time. It's simple, right? It's so simple. I've already kind of touched on this. You're just using light attacks, heavy attacks. That's really it. With them being able to have a gun and a talisman, but it feels so good that I never got bored of it. Dodging is also completely viable, by the way. You have a duck, you have the ability to go back and forth and off to the sides, and enemies have very telegraphed attacks, so you can tell, okay, I need to dodge this direction. But that does lead me into one problem where all enemies tend to fall into having the same kind of animation for all their attacks, alright? I praised the animations earlier. I do. I think they're fantastic, but enemies all seem to have recycled animations. All these guys, especially in the forest, do this big, wide sweeping thing with their arms. And you kind of see it later on too, when you have these other enemies that do basically the same thing. It's just a little disappointing to see. It's like, okay, I get it. It gives me the clarity of knowing, okay, I just dodge this way, or I should block now with it, right? But at the same time, it's a little annoying to be like, oh, I've seen this before. Some attacks you do, in fact, have to dodge, and that's pretty good. If you get that perfect dodge, it slows down time for a minute. You can get in, get a couple hits. It's really good. Again, I enjoy the combat a lot. I like the fact that you're encouraged to take hits and just block properly. You're very encouraged to get those perfect blocks, so you're parrying. It's a lot of fun. But again, if you're looking for something like DMC5, where you've got a whole lot of depth, it's not really there, but it is still just as satisfying. I really enjoy it a lot. It's kind of similar to how Spider-Man, the Insomniac ones, the combat's not incredibly deep when you think about it, but it is still incredibly satisfying. And Hellboy Web of Wyrd fits that bar perfectly, and that works very well for me. You also have the fact that when you're knocking enemies into walls, especially if you're knocking them into pillars, they drop rocks, and you can throw those rocks at enemies. I got to one point, I believe it was the second boss, actually, where I knocked her into a pillar, and then I was just kind of able to throw rocks at her for the rest of the fight without having to worry about anything. So that is one thing to know. It's kind of overpowered if you do that, but it's still fun. It's good. It's a great time. So, overall verdict of Hellboy Web of Wyrd after having finished it. Overall, the game took me maybe 8-ish hours, just about, to fully complete, and that was with taking a little bit of extra time in those later runs after getting through that little, oh, the game's not actually done section. But here's the thing. Even with those 8 hours, I still felt satisfied. This game's only $25, right? And it's satisfying. The combat feels great. It's so much fun. I love the art style. But here's the thing, if you are looking for a roguelike, I'm going to steer you in another direction. Go check out Inkbound, which just got a huge, massive update that I've been checking out and having a lot of fun with. Or Hades, or Ember Knights, or even Endless Dungeon. Those games are better roguelikes overall than this game could ever hope to be. But if you're looking for something that's fun, and you're a big fan of Hellboy, and you just want something where you can go and beat up these occult folklore monsters and things and just have a good time, yeah, this is still a great game. Again, the combat is super fun. It just does not succeed as a roguelike, and I don't see myself playing post-game runs, like, at all. It's just not there for me. It's not worth it. So, with all that said, again, if you're looking for a fun brawler, this is definitely for you. It's cheap. It's $25. Great little pickup. Good amount of fun for what you pay for. But if you're looking for a roguelike, I'll steer you in another direction. And again, Inkbound just got a massive update, so going to be checking that out, making sure I hit all the things, and then giving you guys a quick update review on that. plenty of more reviews and things on the way. Again, this year has been crazy stacked with games, ladies and gentlemen. It is hard to keep up with it all. Got Song Nunu that's come out today. In fact, the day that this video is going live. But I'm going to be playing that. I'll be reviewing that. It's going to be a good time. I am super excited. Again, plenty of stuff to keep up to date with. Do my best to keep you up to date as fast as possible. But with all that said, ladies and gentlemen, this is Our Eyes on Indie. My name is Finn. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. And guess what? If you want to keep up to date with all indie things going on, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We do our best to give you everything as fast as possible. And if you enjoyed this review, go ahead and give a like, leave a comment. What are your thoughts on Hellboy Web of Wyrd? Have you played it? Do you like Hellboy even? Did you even know who Hellboy was before you played Injustice 2? Who knows? But with all that said, you have a good one, and we'll be here with Our Eyes on Indie.